Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming to the last Mass ASPA book talk, in this one in conjunction with the Democracy and Social Justice chapter of ASPA of the season. This is the book Lessons in Social Equity, a case study edited by myself and Richard Gregory Johnson, and we have some amazing authors here today. I want to start off by just saying thank you to everyone. Aaron and I came up with this silly idea a couple of years ago, and we're stupid enough to actually propose it. And it's been a whirlwind of stuff, but you and I have done some really great talks, and it has just been absolutely amazing. I just want to thank you all for a wonderful year. So for this book, we are talking about the Lessons in Social Equity, a case study book. I'm going to provide the link in the chat. And this is a book that's near and dear to my heart because obviously I edited it. But this came about because there's been so much discussion within public administration about social equity, but there's been very little discussion on what does that really mean in practical matters. And I'm a practical person. It's great to talk about social equity, but what have been people's experiences? What can we show to students beyond just the theories to show them how to enact social equity and how it can be easy sometimes and difficult sometimes. We also look at social equity from a wide variety. Some of our chapters talk about race, some talk about deafness. My chapter talks about trying to do everything at once, and how that doesn't always work out very well. So it really was just so exciting to be able to do this book and to share it with so many amazing people. So I would like to start off just by introducing the two speakers. And unfortunately, the reason I'm kind of going a little haywire right now is I'm trying to send the link to one of their speakers having some Zoom issues, so I'm trying to send the Zoom link over. But before I do introduce the two speakers, I do want to mention Dr. Nicole Diggs and Dr. Malcolm Drury, who also participated and were also authors for this. And then it's just been an honor working with both of you. But I would like to introduce Dr. Melissa Buckley and Dr. Brendan Stern. And it would be really great if we can just start off with both of you. Oh, and here is Dr. Lee. So we'll start off just by, I don't know who wants to go first, talking a little bit about what your chapter is about, what you wrote about. Dr. Buckley, do you want to start?
Sure, I'm happy to go first. And I see that my colleagues are here as well. So I'm gonna, I don't know if they're able to turn their cameras on. Can you guys turn your cameras on so everybody can see this really dope team from Coppin State University? I am, of course, Melissa Buckley, and my co-writers are my esteemed chair and my very good friend. We talk every single day. We didn't talk yet this morning, so my day isn't right, but that's Dr. Gilliam. And Dr. Gary Jones is here as well. He's also a part of our social work faculty. And we borrowed Dr. Malcolm Drury from sociology. And we have we have one other colleague who was on this chapter, Dr. Kesselin Braid Stennis, but she's not here today. So we submitted two chapters to this very, very important work. And so, Seth, you were stupid enough, but apparently all of us were dumb enough to to join in this critical work. So thank you for moving it forward.
I just want to also say I'm a social worker and a public administrator. I have an MSW. So when you also, Dr. Lee is also in the social work faculty, and seeing all the social workers come in, it was really fun. So, do you want to talk a little bit about what your two chapters discussed and how you?
Absolutely. So the chapter that I'm going to discuss is about Healing City, Baltimore. So the title of the chapter is Healing City, Baltimore: An Anti-Racist social work pedagogical approach. Healing City Baltimore is a citywide initiative that started a couple of years ago because of a school shooting at one of our local high schools. And actually, that high school backs onto our campus. So Coppin State and Frederick Douglass are very much neighbors. When that shooting event happened, fortunately, there was no loss of life, but that does not mean that there was no trauma. As you can imagine, it was traumatic not only for the students, but certainly for the faculty and staff, as well as the surrounding neighborhood. Unfortunately, um, Frederick Douglass is also smack dab in the center of the geographical location of where the um, the unrest from Freddie Gray's murder took place. So this particular community is no stranger to trauma, but they're also no stranger to healing. Um, the healing, though, that happens oftentimes in disenfranchised communities happens because of the emotional labor of the members of those communities. So, many times the city leadership is absent. There are no resources, financial or otherwise, to aid with the healing. And this is very much true for many of the students that attend this particular high school. And so this case study gave us the opportunity to talk about what we, alongside our students, were able to do to be a part of this movement. Really briefly, I will just share that not only did we launch a citywide initiative, and by the way, Baltimore City is incredible for citywide initiatives. This is nothing new. Healing City Baltimore isn't like this groundbreaking type of a movement. People have always been boots on the ground here in Baltimore City. But what made this uniquely different was that we were able to get legislation passed, the first in the nation of its kind. There is no other currently, or at that time, a couple of years ago, there was no other legislation at the city, state level that was related to trauma. So, we're particularly proud of that, proud of the fact that that legislation came out of this traumatic experience, and also proud of the fact that students from two universities in particular were able to be a part of the movement. The other chapter, Dr. Drury, can you talk about the other chapter real briefly?
Wow, Dr. Buckley. Hello, everybody. I don't believe you did that. Well, just briefly, just to the our chapter, and just because I wasn't supposed to talk, Seth, I'm not going to really like say much about it. But our chapter is about the Maryland HBCU lawsuit. And some of you all know that there are 4 HBCUs in the state of Maryland. And this lawsuit stemmed from 2006 when there was the Maryland, the state of Maryland sued the OCR because there was no equity in the HBCUs and the PWIs, predominantly white universities or institutions in the state of Maryland. So our chapter looks at like this long-standing lawsuit, and it kind of comes to an end with the lawsuit being settled and the HBCUs receiving $577 million as a result of that lawsuit. So we're kind of looking at, some of the issues that took place along the way, and then looking at the inequities that were happening, during that time period. So I'll end it right there. Thank you.
Thank you. And
That was way better than I would have done. So thanks, Dr. Drury.
Dr. Stern,
Could you spotlight him for me, please?
Aaron, can you spotlight him?
I got it. So before I get going, hang on for a sec. So before I get going, I do have to comment that I am the father of a son who just turned 7. And I got a call from the school for the deaf where he goes, and the nurse said that I had to go and pick him up. And he had a fever of 99. So this morning I drove over, picked him up, and I told my son, you have a fever of 99 degrees, but you don't look that bad. You could have stayed at school, you know? And they have a place where they could have gone and stayed for the day. But anyway, my son said, no, Dad, I think I really needed some sort of mental health day. I said, well, you just became 7. And this is the second time that he's done something like this. Anyway, so I just wanted to say that because it may be that I have to run out and check on him. And if you see me do that, you'll know why. Because, you know, he's got to have that mental health day at 7. He's in the house with me right now. So anywho, it is nice to be here. And my purpose in being here is to sort of, first I want to start off by thanking Seth, just for being such a wonderful editor. He's really giving me the opportunity to write a chapter, and also for putting up with all of my edits.
Your work is wonderful.
So my case study was looking at 2006, the Gallaudet protest that took place. And as Seth had mentioned, you know, the benefit of case studies is in how it is, well, like you said, you were talking about, you know, the practicality of them. What is the practical benefit of a case study? And I really like that phrasing and that approach, because I know for our students, you know, this was a challenge to leadership. This wasn't about shared leadership, right? And it isn't necessarily also about good or bad, who was going to be picked as the leader of the university. That's not really what it was. It wasn't about making a right or wrong choice. You know, anyone could have done that. But the challenge came in was in making bad and worse choices. And the case study is actually what contextualizes that. So currently, the study that I'm talking about, as I said, comes from 2006 from the Gallaudet protest. And very often it is commonly known that there is a phrase used about not being deaf enough, and that occurred during the protest. The charge was that the president-elect was, quote unquote, not deaf enough. And that does, you know, they don't sign well enough. They were not culturally deaf enough. So the protesters rose up because of those reasons and on that basis. They had made a lot of news, both national and international. And it lasted for 9 months, roughly. There were hunger strikes. The campus was actually closed. Over 80 protesters were actually arrested. Senator McCain, who was actually serving on the board of trustees at Gallaudet, resigned because of that protest. So in sum, the narrative there was that the protest was about electing a president who wasn't deaf enough. However, in my case study, I'm going to push back on that. I really am going to push back on that particular narrative. What I argue is that the protest was really about an enduring dilemma that the leaders and the public administrators had to grapple with if we wanted the support for social equity. And that was the dilemma that came into play. The dilemma is about how should we have led and how should we have made decisions. So those are really two of the basic models that we're looking at of what we should have done in terms of decision and representation and the desires and needs of the people. So in the first model, we have an issue of the trustee model. This is where the leaders basically say, just trust me. Trust me to make the best decisions based on the long-term interests of the group. Okay, and for the institution. And for the institution of the people. That's what they wanted. The other model, delegate model. That's where instead of saying, listen, just trust my instincts on this and I'll make the decision for you, you know, we're going to follow the popular desire of the people. So that was very different. Those are two different models we encountered about decision making. So it was interesting enough that in this case study, as I was doing it, if you look at the history, history has actually changed. A long time in the past, decisions were actually made more following this trustee model. Like, for example, it's like political parties do, right? When they select who they're going to have as their nominee. There are very few leaders in that group or in that party who make the decision about who is going to be nominated. And similar with the leadership that we have of our own trustees. Right, so there was actually a value to the man who's going to be taking over and who we'd be valuing his judgments because he was such an excellent leader. And the same occurred with the university presidency. We placed our faith and trust using this trustee model that the trustees would choose the right person for the job. They would take the time. And historically that has changed. And it's kind of interesting to see how we've moved to something different, where we're looking at the values of the people and more at coming into the delegate model of how decisions are made. And that's what happened with the public administration here. They started to valorize an avant, sort of this avanthood, where you have public administrators who could serve and follow what the interests of the people were, what they wanted. Politically, you know, you have primary elections rather, where people go and decide who's the most popular people and then you make a decision. Well, similar, this is what was wanted to be done with the university president, but instead of seeing this as a selection, they wanted to see this as an election rather than a selection. And that's what the people wanted. And the people within the Gallaudet community who were not the trustees felt like that was moral inequity and injustice. And so up came the protest. So I could go on that, but that's basically it in a nutshell. So the question here regarding the case study, so at the end of the day, how should public administrators go about making decisions? Should they be based on their own best judgment? Or what the people want? What the majority of the people want specifically? So how do you handle that? How do you navigate that? Because they're very different. So what's going to happen next? So that's what my case study is grappling with, is that very question.
Thank you so much. And Dr. Lee, I'd love to hear if you want to talk a little bit about what you wrote.
Hello, everyone. Hi, my name is Sang-in. I go by Isabel, and then unfortunately, I'm not Dr. Lee yet. Soon to be. No worries, no worries. Professor, yes, Professor Meyer. So I'm a PhD candidate at the Graduate School of Social Work and Social Research of Bryn Mawr College. PhD candidate, and yeah, I'm actually a social worker and a case manager. So when I heard about social worker, I was so glad. Oh, by the way, say hello, Dr. Stern, and then hello, Dr. Johns, even though I don't see you. It's so good to see familiar names. So long story short, my area of interest based on my field work experience is Asian critical race theory, based on the model minority. And perpetual foreigners misperception, and then how that the racial positioning and racial realities of Asian community impact their health and social services seeking kind of dynamics. And then how that culturally informed factors change the dynamics within their family members. So my chapter is about how a East Asian family, like epitome of the model minority perception, as that they are model minority, which is like easily recognized that Asians do not get sick and they are very healthy, so they don't need any support from the society. Within that misperception carrying on that, which of course we all know that is kind of a conflict dynamics that the white supremacists promote to divide all the minority communities to gain their, interest in the society. So I promoted a family of named Johnny, Jane, a brother and sister, and no, I'm sorry, Johnny and the Jane brother and sister, and Sarah, Johnny's wife. So long story short, when we talk about East Asian culture, that they respect to older parents, especially when they sacrifice everything for their children to come to the United States, they just take it that is their duty to take care of their older parents. However, that even though Johnny and Jane are both professionals, highly successful, when it comes to take care of their parents, they just give it up. It's just right before the pandemic. So I met Johnny around 2019, and we were just navigating through the home and community-based services, and then navigating through the waiver services, and then all walking through this service and that service. We faced that, what are the perceptions about East Asian getting the necessary services, even though they paid taxes all their lives, even though they had faced multiple challenges in the United States. And then there's a culturally and linguistically appropriate services mandated by the state and federal government to assist racially or underserved population. But how that class could be in just name only, how that it cannot be triggered down to the people in need. So we spent almost a year to receive all the necessary services. And in the meantime, John gave up his job, like very lucrative job. And then now he opens up a restaurant locally. So just to be with their parents. And in the meantime, of course, the pandemic hit, and the anti-Asian hate crimes just populated. And then we are seeing that Johnny's mother have seen lost a dear friend, someone even suicided because of the terror that they would face in the street. So walking through all these scenarios and walking through all these dynamics, what I wanted to promote is raise awareness that what are the racial positioning and racial realities of Asian Americans in the United States, and how that it can impact their services, which is necessary to survive, and which should be, provided to them without knocking the door really hard. And what are the impacts of the pandemic, and how that the data can be so distorted to show that Asians basically are waived from all the challenges. So I feel very, very privileged to make a contribution to this noble book. And then I was really felt great that as a doctoral student that I could join this very, very well-known and renowned professors in the field. So thank you very much.
We were honored to have you. When I saw your proposal, it was so exciting. Not exciting, but it was really, you provided great discussion. And from both PA and social work, it's something that we don't talk about as much, anti-Asian hate and a lot of the Asian community. So it was, it was a pleasure to work with all my editors, with all my chapters, and to read them the first and second time, it was great. The third time I was exhausted.
Yeah,
And just briefly, my chapter, I wrote about Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and an organization that is trying to work to create equitable environments and safe gyms in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and talk about how to create a nonprofit that's focused on social equity, some of the issues that come about, and the complexities of creating safe gyms. In this organization I have been working with, and anyone who knows me knows how important social equity and mixed martial arts is for me. I'm going to ask a couple more questions, but I want to let you know the chat is open if you would like to also ask questions, and you can always either send them to either myself or Aaron, or send them over to the chat room, and Aaron and I will be checking them. But one thing is, now that you've all gone through the process, I would love to hear any tips you may have for anyone who's thinking of writing a case study. What were some challenges? What made it easier or harder for you? So any thoughts about tips for people writing these? One thing I'll start off with is just have fun with it. It's not the same, it's academic writing, but you can really have fun with it in a way you can't with a journal article.
I'll go next because I think I'm going to have the simplest one. As you can see, I'm not, my first language is not even English. And then I was a career changer. I could not even work in the United States because of the visa restrictions. So changing to social work and going to the doctoral program was a huge challenge. And when I get to understand, the process a little by little, there were always great mentors. And there are so many people willing to help me through, as long as you have a will. So I have this idea, and I'm gonna just do it. And then I just submitted. And then, like, Professor Meyer said, I resubmitted 3 times, but he was very patient with me and walked me through, and even sent me an article that I can refer, that, how to just write down step by step. So it takes time and it takes courage. It was not easy because my oldest one was making fun of me all the time. Like, Mom, I really don't understand how you are going through the graduate program. I know, like, they were like, making fun of me, but it was just like Professor Meyer said, it was fun. And then I enjoyed a lot. So my tip to potential writers is to just go for it. Thank you.
I'll piggyback on that. I think that what makes it, so I wouldn't say it was fun, quite frankly, but that was probably because of the topics that we chose to grapple with, especially the HBCU lawsuit one. But and several of us are graduates of a couple of HBCUs. So for us, like, this case study is our lived experience. But that's what makes this study so rich. We're not just talking about it from a theoretical perspective. And what we know as helping professionals is that when we were sitting in classes, the classes that we enjoyed most were the classes where our professors included case studies, something real that didn't happen 20 years ago. It needed to be something that was relatable, something that was current, and definitely in our case, something that stirs you. So I think it's really important to the integrity of case study research that it's something that you feel particularly passionate about, and that should come across in the research.
Dr. Stern?
I agree. Sure, I guess I'll talk a little bit more. Hold on one sec, let me get the spotlight to reset my settings so I can see you. Yeah, I agree 100% with Dr. Buckley's comments that I think the best tip that I could have to offer related to writing a case study is to really throw away what you think you've already learned thus far in your various years of schooling or writing your thesis or a journal article for publication. I think the goal of writing a case study is not to make a point, right? But rather to just tell a story. Because I think that's the really beautiful part of writing a case study, at least for me, because, you know, the study, we talk about sort of power and dynamics and being proactive, and we talk about the power of a narrative rather. And so I think that's the big part. So the question is, how do then we practice that in the classroom then? So maybe it's obvious to some of you, but for me, I struggled until I wrote a case study, and then I finally thought, oh, now I get it. The power of the case study is that it's a beautiful way to expose students to the power of a narrative. And then you tie it in with some theory that you've discussed in class. Yeah, so back to my tip then. I think start off by writing a case study by thinking about the narrative. What's the story that you're trying to tell? Yep.
Definitely. And I think one of the fun things, you know, I also do editing for a journal, but one of the great things about editing this book was that I was reading stories. And, you know, my editing is always like, how can I make this story, you know, how can I help you tell your story? Because there were a lot of amazing stories. I'm just so proud of everything that all of my authors have done. But there are a lot of amazing stories from around the world. And to be able to kind of see all these stories coming together, I think the students will love it. I'd love to hear a little bit more about, and, you know, Dr. Buckley, I may put you on the spot just because you did mention this. I would love to hear a little bit more about how can we use case studies in the classroom. Journal of Public Affairs Education also has case studies, and anyone who after this is interested in writing a case study, I would definitely be happy to help you out in any way, but the Journal of Public Affairs Education does accept case studies, and I've included a link. But I'd love to hear a little bit about how you can use case studies in the classroom. You know, what are some things to think about? What are some tips? Any concerns?
I love that question. And it immediately makes me think about what you requested for us for the last part of our chapters, which is, you know, those guiding questions. So I think that the way that we use case studies is we present it. I love breaking students down into small groups. And so I know that with this book, because of course we're going to use this book in class, right? Definitely, I see myself having the students in small groups to go through the case and talk about, what did you feel? Let's start there first. And then as we begin to, you know, make connections between what your initial thoughts were, how did you feel, what did you want to do? Well, then we can begin to, you know, to marry our professional skill set to what our emotions are saying. So yeah, I think it's important that we are given the opportunity to sit with it. You know, qualitative research, especially when it comes to narratives, one of the things that makes narratives so important is that people need to be able to tell their story. So what happens on the other side of that? Do you just tell your story and I don't do anything with it? I should be able to do something with what I am hearing. And that's why having scholars to sit with it and to talk about their thoughts and their feelings and their impressions, that sort of closes the gap on case studies / narrative research.
You'd think I'd know how to use Zoom by now. Brandon or Isabel, do either of you want to add anything?
I see Dr. Gilliam's hand is up.
Oh yeah, Dr. Gillian, would you like to add something?
First of all, thank you so much. This is a great discussion, and it's interesting to hear everybody's approach to it. One thing I wanted to add about how do you use case studies. I have used case studies in classes for years and use them all the time in makeup cases to for dialogue in the class. And what I like to do is read it as a whole entire class and then break out into groups and then come back together to see, because we all heard the exact same thing at the exact same time, and then come back together to see what they took away. So that's one way that I like to use it. But in the chat, I put down one of the things that I know we struggle with as a group was exactly how do you write a case study? Even though we know we have all used them, we've never really used them for others to use or to put into publication. So that was an interesting process, and thank you for the link. But as a social work educator, I always get so frustrated with social work that we have to go everywhere else to find the tools that we need to do what we know we do. So you just made me think about, we need to have how to write case studies for social work specific or behavioral science specific, because I know many of the social sciences are using case studies, and where do we learn how to do it, and how do we learn how to do it? So that was something that cannot tell you how we dedicated whole meetings to Googling how to write a case study.
So true, which is exactly why I say, like, it wasn't easy, because we went back, and your article that you provided us at the beginning was very helpful. But yeah, we were like, okay, so what is the actual difference between rising action and climax? That was, the framework that we decided to go along with. So yeah, it was particularly challenging. But when Nicole said in the chat box, that was the hardest part. No, I'm sorry. There was somebody said something about like that aha moment. I think it's Stephanie that said that. I remember getting to that moment in our process where I was like, oh, this is how it works. I felt less dumb at that moment because it was hard to get to that place. But I think if we just remember, we're telling the story about what happened. If you use that as your guide, you should be okay.
And I did just add the link for that article on how to write a case study in the chat. Dr. Diggs?
I would say, just writing my part, I didn't feel like it was super hard, because after reading, the case study that you provided us on how to write it, when we talk about just telling the narrative, I love telling stories. So this was the opportunity to just tell a story and try to take myself from trying to really ask questions or make sense of it and just present it. And the question that was just asked about how do we present this to students, or how do we use this in the classrooms? Well, in PA, a lot of things, we're moving away from doing capstone projects to doing more case study analysis. So I started thinking of it in terms of my students and how they can analyze it and how it can make them truly critically think about these issues and how they would address it as public administrators, and how they can really critique the actions that were done in these case studies and apply the theory and all the lovely thick stuff that we learn in our programs and use that in a practical way. And that's what helped me kind of keep focused as I was going through this process.
That's fantastic. I will acknowledge that when Dr. Gilliam wrote, we need a book about how to write case studies, I hid. It's like, oh no, not another book. Dr. Stern, it seemed like you were also about to say something a little bit ago when we were talking about how to write, or how do you use case studies?
Yeah, I was going to talk about that earlier, because I find myself working really hard on sort of my discussion questions for class, right? Same as most of us, right? And I, just worked on the case study myself and had to develop this guiding questions at the end. And so I do that a lot for my lectures. I have discussion questions, and I think it's a really good way to sort of stimulate sort of those difficult conversations in a classroom. So I think I have two sort of usual guiding principles in mind. And I tie that into how I'm going to use the questions in the classroom. First is that, right, we're not going to go looking for a right answer. There is no right answer, but there is a way to ask the right questions. And I think the goal is really to ask the right questions. And so I'm encouraging students to ask the right questions while also responding to the discussion questions. So that's the first principle, which I think it's important to have students do that type of activity. And then the second principle is, as students really develop their responses to the questions that I give them, you know, because I think it's really important to understand the importance of defending an informed response, right? And giving weight to certain responses, or, you know, giving benefits, a risk-benefit analysis kind of thing. So, and they really have to sort of defend their approach with evidence and experience. So I'm encouraging that kind of critical thought in the classroom as well that way, because I think that's definitely an added value to the classroom for using case studies. That's what you can get out of it in the discussions.
Those are all fantastic points. For me, one of the things, especially when I use case studies around social equity, is kind of balancing that general, that, you know, there are a lot of general things, but also acknowledging that many communities also have specific experiences, and acknowledging those specific experiences and helping students understand that they may not have those experiences, and helping students learn how to ask these questions and how to build up social equity and support other people, even though their experiences will be very different. I always call it, like, because I'm a critical theorist, you know, all of us have very different truths, and understanding how to incorporate different truths into your work. And then I think Heather, Wyatt, and Nicole, I'm sorry if I'm mispronouncing it, asked a question about how do you avoid lawsuits when writing specific case studies? I don't know how to answer that one. That's a good question.
Hi. It looks like Melissa has answered that question. Thank you.
Yeah.
And I guess, you know, one of the things I always worry about is I don't well, here, if anybody's watching HBO lately, the great series now, the Gun Trace Task Force, right? But my concern always is someone coming out and saying, well, you put me in a negative light, or, you know, that's what concerns me, right? Slander, libel, those sorts of things.
I think part of it is, of course, changing names. My case study is small beans, but we change the names of everyone. And then for bigger things, so for example, the chapter with Dr. Drury, that a lot of, you know, the story was great. It was a really great case study. A lot of it is public record. And, you know, you did a lot of amazing work, but because a lot of it is public record, you are able to say, this is what happened. Same with Dr. Stern with his story on the galley protests, public record. I mean, so I think that really, as you said, as Dr. Gillian says, cite. Make sure you point to, this is where I'm getting my information. So if someone complains about it, it's like, this is where it was from. This is the reality. It's a difficult time to be in doing some of these things. Yes, Dr. Stern. Brendan. Dr. Stern.
Hang on for just a sec, sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So based on my understanding that we're looking at things like slander and libel, I think there's a lot to do with sort of the intent as well. As long as what you're doing is research and you're citing what you're doing without the intent of trying to defame someone, you should be okay.
But it's a very good question, because especially in this day and age, you always want to be careful. So I definitely understand that concern. Are there other questions before I go in with more before I go in with more questions?
Can I just add, I think though too, that concern is also why so many great stories don't necessarily get told, or why we have so much limited content sometimes in our courses. And so I do think that what Dr. Buckley said is that we approached it with a point of we really wanted to tell this story. And we were careful to make sure we were pulling, where do we get this information? How do we know? I know we asked that a lot in our meetings. Just to keep each other in check, that it's not just something that we heard, but that is documented somewhere. But to get the diversity of stories that we want to have told, sometimes you have to be willing to risk, especially in this beautiful charm city, telling some of these stories from different perspectives and different points of views, because especially the HBC lawsuit and even the Hill and City, the narrative that is put out there sometimes is very much Fox News version of the story that gets told to the public without some of the stories behind the stories. And so that's one of the things we try to counter in our classes, to get the students to think critically about these things from different perspectives and points of views, and to think about the case study as an opportunity to tell a different version from somebody else's perspective of the story.
And I'm sorry, Charm City, is that Baltimore? Okay. Other questions? So one of my thoughts is just about teaching social equity in general, and I'm going to really call on the social workers, especially for this one. Any tips for just discussing social equity? I definitely feel that social work is a little bit ahead of PA in talking about social equity and the inequities that exist in society. So I know we've talked about using case studies, but any general tips for professors who want to discuss social equity in their classrooms in ways that it can be talked about? Am I confusing people, or does that make sense? I'm just confusing people.
No, it wasn't confusing. I'm just waiting for others because I don't want to be that person who's always talking.
Please, you can definitely start us off.
Melissa, go. We love hearing from you. So by all means, talk.
All righty. Yeah, I can tell you that at Coppin, at least among my colleagues, we talk about the inequities all of the time. And it shows up in different ways. It's either, through an assignment, like, through a research paper, or what do you call that thing that we use? The discussion boards. Yeah, so, and, like there are so many, sadly, so many inequities. And quite frankly, I feel that as a social worker and as a Black woman, I have to talk about this stuff. I don't get to not talk about these things. And so the students that are in our classes, that's the energy that they get. We, as predominantly Black people at an HBCU, entering this field where we are working with various marginalized groups, we got to talk about these things. So whether it's through classroom discussion or an actual assignment, we're putting all of this stuff forward. And honestly, let me add this to that. It's exhausting to do that because there's always something in the friggin' news that we have to talk about, that we have to, shed light on. But yet still, we have to do it.
And Dr. Drury, I think you wanted to add. I'd love to.
Yeah, I just wanted to real quick just piggyback on what Dr. Buckley was saying. And I think we address and talk about this all the time. We always are addressing the inequities that we're seeing, whether it be in a classroom or presenting even at a conference. And you may be the only person in the room that's discussing some of these issues, but it just has to be said. I've kind of made it a point over the last couple of years that almost everything that I write, and I don't know if I'm doing it because of what I keep seeing in the media, or what is discussed so often, but I just include and talk about critical race theory or use it as one of the theoretical frameworks in whatever I'm speaking about. So I just got back from a conference that, on sports and sociology. And I was talking about controlling the narrative, how Black athletes, there are so few Black journalists that the narrative that's always being spun about Black athletes, especially Black male athletes, it's one-sided. And all the discussions that are around whatever happens with these Black athletes, it's always going in one direction. And we can start out with just talking about Colin Kaepernick, and how that went. But we always have to move that forward. So you always have to present that inequities are existing and they're out there and they're everywhere. And so I think it's very important.
And Isabel, you wanted to talk?
Sure. Dr. Drury, thank you so much sharing about the critical race theory. Actually, I was going to mention the Asian critical race theory as an expansion of CRT. So, like in America, as a cisgender immigrant, kind of non-traditional student, coming to the academia and, starting from field work, it just gave me so many things to think about. First, I didn't realize that how much that racism is just in the daily, it's like everywhere. It's like in the daily community. So, and then I could not even go to the academia because of some of the restrictions, and then I worked in the field. And I helped a lot of people, Asian Americans with limited English proficiency. But the more I get to know about the systems, like why that we have to ask, knock the door because of the cultural and linguistic differences. I thought it was kind of another layer of racism. And as a social work background, that the critical race theory just gave me something to think about, but it doesn't fit into the Asian American people because of the kind of strong white-Black dichotomy. And when I read about Latino critical race theory in the 1990s, and then it follows the Asian critical race theory, it was like Eureka for me, because it just fits into the intersectionality of Asian American. So what we all want to achieve is that we are all different, but sharing our stories, sharing our perspectives, we get to understand the others. And I get to understand, it's for me to understand, okay, this is critical race theory, and this is Asian critical race theory, this is La Crit. And I even made a table how those are all different dynamics. And it becomes understand how that the La Crit becomes available because of their historical, history and then interaction in the American, United States. It just gave me so much to think about. So for me, social equity is to see that how the other party on the other street can be resonated through my story. So I think this, even though like Dr. Drury said, I'm the only person talking about these issues, that I will probably go on doing so, because that is the only way that we get to understand, these people have challenges as well. So yeah, so thank you very much for bringing it up, and the great question, Professor Meyer.
Thank you. And one thing I'd also like to say, because I talk a lot about transgender issues in my classes, especially. I talk about LGBTQ issues all the time. Transgender issues and LGBTQ issues are something very personal for me. I always say in the beginning, I'm not going to debate anyone's humanity. Trans people exist and have always existed. Now, I'm Jewish, and we have 7 to 9 different we have a history of transgender discussions in Judaism. I can answer questions about laws and explain why they're hurtful to transgender people, but I'm not going to debate someone's humanity. And I think, especially using like kind of that language, and I don't debate anyone's humanity in any sort of race or religious area, but especially I find people have started to feel very comfortable debating transgender people's existence. Starting off with that really helps set a tone. There are things we can debate. There are questions that, as Dr. Stern said, it's good to ask those questions and to understand, why are these laws harmful? Where are the, for transgender, the transphobic roots, or for these anti-CRT laws, the historical racist roots of these laws, and to ask questions to better understand the world. And that's a very different and something that we can really encourage while allowing students to also feel safe in our classrooms. Because there is, and this is something I found in social work a little bit as well. Dr. Diggs said it seems like discussing social equity comes naturally. I can talk a lot about how social equity is dealt with in social work. We sometimes talk about social equity just for the majority, but we forget that there's minority people in there, and we don't want to force them to have to explain themselves in their lives. We want them to feel comfortable in our classroom as well. And we need to create that balance. I think that in public administration, there's becoming more and more of a grouping of people who are talking about social equity. I've been doing this for, 6 years now in public administration, and it's grown since then even. So I think as more people have these discussions, as more resources become available and more people have these discussions, we'll have more resources and more support for each other. Other thoughts? It doesn't have to just be the authors or anyone else. One last thing I'll say, because Melissa, I'm not worried about being that person who talks too much. Allow yourself to feel nervous and allow yourself to feel anxiety. I feel it when I talk about certain aspects of social equity. When I'm talking about racism, I feel some anxiety, like, am I doing this right? Am I doing everything correctly? Am I making sure all my Black students and my Hispanic students feel comfortable in these conversations? I feel anxiety. And of course, I'm also a pre-tenured professor who's gay and Jewish. There's always going to be a level of anxiety. With a child of color. So, there's a lot of levels of anxiety. I would say allow yourself to feel that anxiety. You could even, I've acknowledged it in class. I am anxious sometimes about talking about these things. I don't want to end up on a list. I don't want, I have a lot of things to worry about. But these are so important that we do need to discuss. But allowing your students to see that anxiety could help them when they're also anxious about having these conversations to know these can be hard conversations. Melissa, please. Oh, you're muted.
Yeah, 2 years, and we still don't always get it right here on Zoom. But yeah, that really resonated very deeply with me. So I think that it's important for students to see the humanity in us. We have to model this behavior, and the humanity I'm speaking of is admitting that this makes me nervous. I am not all that comfortable talking about this particular thing, and also being willing to continue learning. It's funny. On Saturday, I went to this workshop, and they were talking about some upcoming workshops. one of which is about transgender, I don't want to say transgender issues. I always feel really horrible when I say that, but that's an example of the anxiety and the nervousness. Like, am I saying it right? Is anybody going to be mad at me? You know what I mean? So, but I'm going to the workshop because I know that I don't know enough about this particular demographic. And I want to. I want to be able to better understand so I can, speak about this not as an expert, but really more so to be able to truly communicate empathy, care, and regard for members of that particular community.
And I just did exactly the same thing. Dr. Diggs, your hand up.
I will not follow you all's lead and I will take myself off of mute. But that was a good point, Seth. I think when it comes to dealing with anxiety, it's important to have the support of networks. So being part of DSJ and being part of other social equity networks is helpful. I also think it's important to have good departmental support. I know in some departments or universities that's not there, but somebody has to be the first. And just like Dr. Buckley said, because you are a Black woman, as a Black woman myself, and I'm teaching majority Black women at my HBCU, I feel like it's my responsibility or obligation to present these issues and to present different scenarios to get them to think about how they would address issues when they become public administrators. Because when I look at our student demographic and I look at the demographic of those who are taking local government offices and state and federal jobs, when you look at leadership, they aren't Black women. Like, we are disproportionately underrepresented. And if we are getting master's degrees in public leadership, like, where is the disconnect that's happening? So it's important for me to present this to them and challenge them to say, we need you to step up in these positions, because the only way change is going to happen is if we're in the room and sitting at the table making those decisions. But I also feel like the lone soldier, because I am the only African-American female in my department. So it's, all right, let's push a class on this. Let's do different workshops to get it going. But, I do have the support from my department to do that.
It's wonderful. And Dr. Gilliam?
All such great points. And one of the things that I was just thinking about as you were saying is that too, we're very fortunate to live, I don't know how fortunate we are or not, but to live in this technology time, because there really are some great resources out, and I can't think of any specific ones off the top of my head, but there are videos that I typically use in class, images, memes, to really demonstrate the differences between equality, equity, and then also social justice as it relates to equity, because just because you get equity doesn't mean that things are still right. And so then what does that mean to go beyond that? So there's also some great resources and tools that are available, I think, to help supplement the conversations and the discussions, and then also being open enough to reach out to colleagues, because we are not all experts on the same things, which was really great about us working on our chapters together, because each of us had some different spin on what the topic was. So being comfortable enough to collaborate with other people, that you don't have to be the expert on everything, to reach out and to, ask others who are experts in those areas. But there's some really great videos now and short case examples and stuff that you can use in some of your materials to really try to bring across the message to students.
That's a wonderful point. And then also, it doesn't always have to just be you. And it's amazing. I've zoomed into classrooms. I've had other people zoom into my classrooms. Brendan, did you have your hand up as well?
No, it's fine. I did before, but I'm good.
Other thoughts about this important topic for both social work and PA, because we do have, what's fun about this is we have an interdisciplinary panel and sociology.
Well, to that very point, as you know, because you have an MSW, but there are, we emphasize, well, we encourage cross-disciplinary work. Students can get a dual degree at the master's level, so they can get the MSW and, say, for example, a JD. They can get an MSW and an MPH. I'd love to see an MSW and a public administration dual degree program because we need social workers. We already have social workers in those spaces, but it would be such a rich um, merger of resources, I think, to have that sort of a degree offering. But yes, to have this cross-disciplinary approach, um, I'm super duper excited about this. It really just speaks to the work that we're all already doing. We're doing this work side by side, shoulder to shoulder. So to see it in this form is pretty incredible. I hear that, Nicole. Yeah, let's make it happen. I don't know where we're gonna find the time, Dr. Gilliam, but let's make it happen.
You make the very important point of time, because I don't know about you, I'm tired. Very tired. And I agree with you. I love the interdisciplinary approach. I know Columbia had an MSW MPA program, and I think a couple of others do. I also know that the Network of Social Work Management actually creates a human service certificate where they encourage interdisciplinary approach so that social workers can get a certificate in nonprofit management, basically. And there are some great nonprofit management stuff as well. Seth, how did you start the process with this book? So Dr. Richard Gregory Johnson, Sean McCandless, and I came up with this. Unfortunately, Dr. McCandless, who is just absolutely amazing, couldn't do the book because it was a conflict of interest because he is the case study editor of the Journal of Public Affairs Education. So he couldn't do this, but that's why I keep also mentioning the journals, because I want to support him and his work too. But we just really realized that there wasn't much in the practical aspect. Sean and Mary Guy had just put out a textbook on how to teach on social equity in public administration. But we had realized that a lot of it was theoretical. And it was hard to kind of help students transfer that theory-based to the actual practical aspects. And we can all talk about our own experiences, but we realize that all of our experiences are limited to us. So, and we also realized that, as we were talking, a lot of our experiences are American focused. And as we talk about social equity in America looks different than one of our chapters discusses an organization in Zambia. And that's social equity there is going to look drastically different. In India, it looks drastically different. So helping students really move away from just an American focused social equity. These were all just discussions we had, and they were like, well, why don't we edit a book? I was like, sure. And I was like, oh crap. But this really has been, I joke about it because that's what I do with my time, is make jokes. But editing this has been so amazing because I have been able to see all of your stories. And I get to do the thing I love doing, is reading and giving my criticism and telling my opinion. And that's how it came about. I was in charge. And one thing I'll say, if you ever want to do a book like this, one thing that really worked for Richard and me, and unfortunately Richard couldn't be here, he had a personal emergency. But one thing that worked is that we divided it up. So Richard dealt mostly with the editor and dealing with all that. I was the public face to the writers. So all of the chapter writers know me probably better than Richard, just because this is the way we divided it up. When we got the cases the first time, we divided up the cases in editing, so that nothing was just we weren't just all reading all of them, but we were able to divide it up so it was doable and we can give better feedback. So really making sure when you go through this process, if you want to edit a book or anything, making sure you and your co-editors in the very beginning create very clear guidelines on who will do what. And, flexibility, we realized that some stuff was going to be more work and we changed things around, but it really helped us so that there were clear guidelines. One of us was talking to one group, one of us was talking to another group, and it never made it feel too overwhelming. So, and now the ebook is now available, and I can't believe that the physical book will be in my hands in June. I can't believe it. I really can't.
Congrats, that's great, June. Wow.
And I also can't believe June is next month. I still think it's April. We're getting close to the end, but any other last remaining questions or comments?
I just wanted to say thank you for your efforts. Thank you for the opportunity to contribute to this book because it is much needed. I know you said it was a crazy idea, but I'm glad that that crazy seed was planted into you and that you and Richard and Sean actually saw it through. I've heard some horror stories about editing books, but I'll just say on my end, I think this was a very enjoyable experience. It was a pleasure working with you. It was a pleasure even being in this book talk to hear other authors talk about their book chapters. And I'm excited to assign it to my classes and have everybody, putting your points in there. And you get an email from me, do not, shy away from it if I ask you to come and talk to one of my classes or something like that. Okay. I just want to say kudos. And
no, thank you. And I'm always happy to chat.
I may. I just wanted to also build on Nicole's comments and say, again, yes, thank you, Seth, so much, really, because, I could talk about social equity all day and all night, really, could eat, sleep, and breathe it. But Seth, you were amazing, and especially for me as a deaf man, often I don't get those opportunities to write or to contribute to an edited book or even a chapter. And so it was really great to have that external validation via an opportunity to write a whole chapter and contribute to a book. And yes, I know it wasn't easy work, but you made it seem and feel easy to work with you, Seth. And I'm sure the amount of time and energy that it took for you to do this book, but now everything has come to fruition. And for me to be here today and see that it's all worked out and there are interpreters here, and this has been a very enjoyable process. So thanks everything, Seth, that you've done for me as an author, as a person, to be able to work with me. I don't think I could have found a better person to work with as an editor.
Thank you, both of you. And I'm just going to say, Nicole, it was great working with you. Brandon, I actually was the one who, I badgered you to write this chapter because I've read your work before, and it's, so amazing. And deafness is not something we talk about enough in PA. And I love the way you discuss it, and it's not, you show how deaf people have taken control. And you show deaf identity in such a way that we do not discuss enough in PA. So I want to thank both of you, and I want to thank all of my authors because you have all done such amazing work. And I'm very proud of all of you. And I really am excited. Oh, sorry, Melissa, please.
Yeah. I just, of course, want to echo the sentiments already shared. But yes, this, the thing that makes this particular work so makes it feel good and makes me feel really, really proud is the fact that we got to tell these important stories. Whereas typically research is, I don't want to say it's boring, but you know what I mean? Like this was just better. And it's definitely one of the best things that I've ever had the opportunity to be involved in. So, big shout out to my colleagues. Clearly we have more work to do. But yeah, this was really great. And also I want to say, and I'm hoping, again, this is the vulnerability piece. Hoping I don't get it wrong, but Brendan, I feel like having you in this book just upped my street cred. Like I can say that I published alongside Brendan Stern. And that's pretty friggin' amazing. So I'm glad to be affiliated with you. And I'm hoping that we get to work together in the very immediate future.
Mhm.
And don't forget, you can send private chats to exchange emails. Nicole and Krista are already talking. I love it. I'm a networking person. I will push undergrads to meet people that they're interested in. So, and I'm infamous in conferences for taking PhD students to meet the people who they want to talk to. So, Aaron, is there anything else? This is the last book talk of this year, but we will start again next year with other books that we haven't planned yet. Aaron, is there anything you want to say?
No, I just wanted to thank everybody for being a part of this and really recognize the excellent work that you're doing, and we really appreciate it. And hearing all about it was a great way to sort of wrap up the. No, it's not the end of the week, right? It's Tuesday. I wanted to be the end of the week, but it was a great way to hear about great stuff going on, and a good way to end at least my semester. So I hope everybody's in the same boat with the semesters winding down, and hopefully this can serve to be a light for you as well, regardless of when you are temporally in the week.
Thank you, everyone. And it's a pleasure to work with all my authors. It's a pleasure to see everyone here. And I hope you have a good rest of the week. There's 3 more days of the work. Enjoy, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for the invite.
Thank
Aaron,
you.
Aaron, congratulations. We're done.
Woohoo!
Okay.
Fantastic.
Yeah. Oh, and you can end the recording.